All right, thank you all. I've been when I was in, I think, middle school or at least high school, my church in Illinois did a big fundraiser for IDES every year. We called it the Harvest of Talents, and everyone would do some craft or something, and then we would do a silent auction for it, and it was always a lot of fun. But we've known about that good work for a long time. Okay, so today is so as we've talked about before, we get it's called the lectionary. We get to look up the day, and then it gives us the Bible verses, Bible passages for that day. So today, it turns out, is it had the list, and then it called it like Christ the King or something like that, Sunday. So I didn't quite know what that was, so I looked it up. And turns out that in England, this is also called Stir Up Sunday. So I had to look that up, and it's called that because in the Church of England prayers for the day, there's a prayer that says, the beginning of it says, "Stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord," and then it has the rest of the prayer. And so they use that as a reminder to start the Christmas pudding that day. And so there's a tradition where everyone in the family is supposed to stir the stir the Christmas pudding, and then you let it set until Christmas Day. So I think we're going to do that. I don't know if we're going to make a Christmas pudding, but we'll stir something up today for. But it also occurs to me, it's at some point we'll have to like brainstorm what other reminders we need to work into our prayer time, like turn off the oven Sunday, or I don't know everything we would have, but there's got to be some way we can remember to do that. Okay, so Christ the King Sunday. So I thought the stir up thing was kind of fun, but otherwise I've been kind of ambiguous about this. Like, I'm not crazy about, I realize that I've never thought about this before, but I'm not crazy about the kingship part of this. I think I'm just an American. Like, I don't like being told what to do very much. I don't even like telling people what to do. Like, it goes so far that I would just assume not even tell people, but I really don't like being told what to do. And I've sort of noticed this. I noticed this in my kids. My daughter, who plays soccer, she's a good kid. You know, I like to fuss about her. I tell a lot of stories that make her look bad. She's actually a great kid. But she's like me, and she really does not like being told what to do, which is a problem when a coach tells you to do something on the field. Because I have seen her like do the exact opposite of what the coach does. Like, he'll tell her to go one way, and she doesn't like being told what to do, so she just goes and does the other thing. And early in her high school career, the coach was yelling at her to move down the field. Like, she was playing defense, but he wanted her to move down the field and play more offensively. And she just didn't. Like, she just dropped back and went back to kind of to the other side of the field even. And he finally pulled her out and was like, "Why did you not hear me?" And she's like, "Yeah, I heard you. I just didn't agree." So he was like, "Sit on the bench." It's the end of this conversation. But she comes by it honestly, not just me, her grandfather on her mother's side. So I'm not blaming this on her mother. I'm taking some credit, but her grandfather on her mother's side was kind of famous for not liking to be told what to do. We got lots of stories about it, but my favorite one is he got a bill from the telephone company that was wrong. Like, it wasn't the right bill, and so he called him up. And it was like, "This is not my bill. I don't have to pay all this money." And they didn't respond the way he wanted them to. And so he slammed the phone down and took his chainsaw and went out. So they lived on a farm, and there was a road that went down to the main road. And so the telephone line had like 3 telephone poles down their property to where the house was, and then the main road. So he took out his chainsaw, cut down all 3 telephone poles, got a tractor and dragged them to the road, then marched over to the neighbor's house and called the phone company back up and said, "I've got your telephone poles on the road, come get them." Slammed the phone down. and that was into that. He didn't have a phone for the rest of his life. I'm literally for the rest of his life, he didn't have a phone. If you wanted to call somebody, if you wanted to call him, you had to call the neighbors, and they'd go get him. So and we come by it honestly. It's all right. Now I will say though that this sort of notion, this sort of ambiguity about a king, actually has really long roots. I blame it on being American, but it's kind of built into the Judeo-Christian faith. So for instance, in 1 Samuel 8 is when the race is sort of the sort of crisis, like Samuel is like, I thought I was doing okay, and he goes to God, and he's sort of upset about it, and God says, oh no, this has nothing to do with you, right? This is about me. They're rejecting me, and it explicitly says that 1 Samuel 8:7, they rejected me as king. And then he goes on to list, like God goes on to list all of the things that are going to go wrong because Israel wants a king, right? He goes through this whole list. They're going to make you be soldiers. They're going to take your daughters away so they cook and clean for the king. And right, it's just, and the idea is that the king exists for itself, right? The office of the king exists for itself and becomes sort of self-perpetuating. So you owe your service to the human king at the expense of whatever you might owe to the divine king. But it's, even that's ambiguous, because 2 kings down we get David, and David is beloved by God and is a hero to Israel, brings Israel, David and his son Solomon bring Israel to prominence. Jesus is of the line of David, right? And in some ways, who Jesus is makes sense in light of the king who is David. So it's ambiguous, but the kingship as a thing, this kind of human kingship, begins kind of as a negative, right? That it's not, they don't think of it as a kind of positive, mature way of understanding who they are in relationship with God. And in some ways, it's kind of a rejection of God, which God accommodates, but it's still ambiguous, right? Still ambiguous. We actually see a similar problem in Acts, right? In the first chapter of Acts, Jesus has returned. Like, they've gone through this whole trauma of Jesus dying, and then the what must have been this deep emotional upheaval of Jesus being resurrected. And then he finally reappears to them, right? And they have this final encounter with him. And they say to him, are you now going to restore Israel? And what they're asking is, okay, so they're thinking, so you're the king in the line of David, and you've demonstrated that by being resurrected. Like, there was a moment when we thought, well, maybe you're not the king because they killed you, but you're back, right? And so what they wanted was, what they're really asking is, where's the 4th Infantry Division? Because we're ready to go, right? We don't like the Romans controlling Israel. You're a king, you're a warrior king, we think. So let's bring in the troops and kind of throw out the Romans and restore Israel to the place that David had it, all those years ago. It's just a complete misunderstanding of what Jesus was about, but that misunderstanding was filtered through their understanding of what a king was, right? They had this really deep notion that the king would come to be a military leader, be a political leader, and restore Israel to prominence. Now, I'm sympathetic to Jesus here, because I've been teaching for a while now, and I get misunderstood all the time. I just got a round of projects that I either completely miscommunicated, or they completely misunderstood, or something happened. Maybe it's just COVID brain, and we just didn't connect somehow. But what I got was not what I asked for, and so I sort of understand the misunderstanding. But yet, this was a pretty significant misunderstanding, because they thought Jesus was going to be one thing, and he wanted them to see that he was going to be something else. So I want us to enter into this kind of thinking about what Jesus means as king, what it means for Christ to be king, with this sense of ambiguity. It's just not quite clear exactly what sense we're supposed to make of this, especially since there's so much king language in the New Testament. So they're ambiguous about Jesus, about having a king, and yet they use this language all the time. This comes up over and over again, including in this passage. In some ways, this is one of the most scary passages in the whole New Testament, I think, because it's just so stark. Um, if you want to know if you're going to go to heaven, Jesus gives you a really objective metric, right? You can almost just make a list and say, did I take care of the sick? Did I visit those in prison? Did I clothe the naked, right? And check those off. And then Jesus says, well, says, no, that doesn't work. It's framed, the whole passage is framed within the context of Jesus' lordship, of Jesus' kingship, right? So it starts by saying, when he returns in all of his glory, right? When he establishes his rule in the way that the Messiah is supposed to do, he's going to decide who gets to be inside the kingdom, who's going to be outside the kingdom. And you want to know if you're going to be in, well, check off the boxes. If you can't check off the boxes, I think it's right turning in. It's like going to the DMV when you're trying to renew your license plate. Like they don't really care. I found they will say, do you have this and this and this document? And I will pull out my documents. I mean, this happens to me almost every time. We went to renew, and I was missing a document, and I was like, I clearly live where I think I live, right? I know I'm not trying to cheat. And she's like, I don't care. And really didn't care, right? She really didn't care, and just moved on to the next person. I had to go home and come back, and for Jesus, that's kind of how he frames it here. So let's sort of step back and kind of think about what this means. So how can we make sense of this kind of ambiguity? On the one hand, we have all this king language, Christ the King. On the other hand, we have this real ambiguity about what it means to be a king. So let me give kind of three ways, I think, that help us make sense of this. So the first thing to say is that Jesus rejects political power. This is unequivocal, right? There's no place in the ministry or teaching of Jesus where he embraces political power. In fact, every time he's given the chance to do that, he says no, right? So we're thinking about, the cross, right, to begin with, is the ultimate rejection of political power. But even before that, the temptation of Jesus when Satan comes and offers him all the kingdoms of the world in a political way, he says no, right? He always turns his back on the opportunity to do that. In fact, and so we can take that further. Jesus shows us that true power comes through weakness, right? This is a theme that Paul picks up on a lot. Says it explicitly, right? Power comes through, strength comes through weakness. And that's significant. We can never forget the cross when we talk about Jesus. He did not demonstrate his power by being powerful, right? You'll sometimes see Superman Jesus, where he's on the cross and he rips open his shirt and there's a big S or something. That's a little bit of a blasphemy, frankly. And they're funny, but it's a little. It gets pretty close to being heretical, because that's not the sort of a posture towards power that Jesus demonstrates. We're going to start Advent next week and kind of move towards Christmas. Have you seen the Talladega Nights, the Ricky Bobby movie? I don't know if I can recommend it, but there's a funny scene. There's a funny scene at the beginning where he's praying. He's leading the family prayer, and he wants to pray to little baby Jesus, because he likes the idea of baby Jesus a lot better than Jesus dying on the cross Jesus, which is funny. But Jesus died on the cross, and you kind of can't get away from that at all, obviously, as a Christian. And what that suggests is that power is not, right? Political power is not the goal here. And so one of the implications here that sort of emerges out of all of this is that we are called to act not out of obedience, but out of love, right? This is a kind of core moral teaching of Christianity, that what you do is an expression of love. You do it because you want to, not because you're told to. All throughout the Bible, really from beginning to end, we're sort of called to move from that sort of immature, childlike way of understanding why I do what I do to a more mature understanding of doing what I do because I want to, right? And because it's the right thing to do, because I love to do the right thing to do. We've been, one of my kids have been on remote learning all year. And one of the things that's come up is how do you keep them from cheating? Like when they take a test or something, how do you keep them from cheating? We've had conversations with their teachers about that. They're actually going to have to go in and Adelaide's going to have to go in and take her final exam because they're worried about not there's now like software companies are making a lot of money developing software which is designed to monitor somebody over the computer. So it like turns the camera on and tracks eye movement. So if it looks like you're looking down or looking over to check your notes or something, then the software will flag that. And there are stories of people failing tests because their eyes went the wrong way or something. That doesn't strike me as a particularly helpful way to learn, right? To sort of foster education. One of the things Michelle, my wife, has always said, she's a great teacher, and one of the things she's always said is students will live up to the standards you set for them. So if you treat them like they're cheaters, then they're going to cheat. If you treat them like they're honest, then they'll be honest. And it's not 100%, obviously, but in general, that's how it works the best. And kind of teaching kids how to do something because they should do it instead of because they have to do it is so much better. Yeah, I'm preaching to myself. If I get my kids to clean without me having to tell them how to do it, that would be fantastic. I haven't quite mastered that. I'm going to tell a story about that in a second. I haven't quite mastered that, but that is the goal, right? Because you want to do it, because you want to do the right thing. So what does all this mean for Christ the King? Well, one thing it means is that it brings clarity by revealing that the nature of Christ's kingship is not about telling us what to do, right? It's not about establishing lines of authority. What Christ the King means for us is that we're all under the umbrella of his kingship. And what that means is we're all part of the family of Christ. The Matthew text that Tyson read this morning says that explicitly. I never noticed that before until getting ready for this sermon. But he says that explicitly. In verse 40, he says, it's unless you recognize everyone as part of the Greek word is adelphos, which is the word we get Philadelphia from, right? The city of brotherly love. Unless you recognize that we're all part of this kind of beloved brother and sisterhood, that we're all together, then you're not really part of my kingdom, right? It's not about the caring for the sick and all that. It's not about simply checking off boxes. It's not about simply being obedient. It's about looking at everyone in the world and seeing them as part of the same kingly followers of Christ as everyone else, right? We're all part of the same family. We're all part of the same brotherhood and sisterhood. The NIV translation, I think, is family. And I really like that, right? Unless you see everyone as part of the same family. And so why do I take care of people? Why do I feed the sick and visit those in prison and all that? Because they're part of my family, right? And I do it because I'm part of Christ's kingship and I know that everyone else is. And so we treat everybody accordingly. A political king, Samuel recognized, divides, right? If we put our hope in a political king, then that's going to result in division. But Jesus as king unites us. Jesus as king brings us together as one common brotherhood, right? Beloved brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ. And so the challenge of this passage, I think, is that we learn to obey. We learn to obey Christ. We learn to follow Christ's kingship by learning to see ourselves as part of this kind of common brotherhood, and then to go and treat each other this way, right? The power of the ministry of Ides, for instance, is that it does exactly that, right? It sees the world through the lens of Christ's kingship. And so it goes, right? It brings the light of Christ in all sorts of material and spiritual ways, which is exactly right, because we're all under the kingship of Christ. So I joked about cleaning, but we do have a couple years ago now, I guess. Our second daughter, Eleanor, got sick. And she ended up having a kidney infection. It wasn't really that big of a deal, but when she sort of came upstairs, she looked really bad, like she was dehydrated and really pale, and her eyes were. So it was scary for a couple of minutes, and so we got in and took her to the clinic, and then they said, well, she probably should go to the ER. So we took her to the directly to the ER, and it scared Annalise, our oldest daughter. So she obviously didn't go along with us, but we took her, and we were gone for some time because in the ER they had to. She was mostly dehydrated, and so they put an IV in and then gave her fluids, and she perked right up. And it's a miraculous thing, really. She perked right up, and then kind of pumped her full of antibiotics, and we were there for 3 or 4 hours. Everybody's really nice, and it ended up being fine. She recovered quickly and well, but we didn't really communicate very well with Michelle and I were with Eleanor. We didn't communicate very well with people back home, and so Annalise was by herself. And was scared, and because the last thing she saw was this really pale kind of zombie-like figure marching out the door, and then we texted that we were on our way to the ER, and that made her scared her. And in retrospect, we should have called her and told her everything was going to be okay. So when we got home finally, so we were gone 3 or 4 hours, not too long. When we got home, we took Ellie downstairs to put her in her bed, and walked into the bedroom, and it was spotless. Like the bed was made, all the her dresser was cleaned out. Her dresser is always a mess. Her dresser was cleaned off. All her clothes were picked up and folded. There was a load of laundry, it turned out, going in the laundry room. She had mopped and just had everything ready to go, because that was the only thing she could think to do. Right, she felt helpless and scared, but she also loved her sister, and she understood, right, that I've got to do something to demonstrate that. And if I had told her you got to clean your sister's room, like that would have been World War III. But when faced with the realization that this is something I can do to help, right, in a situation that I'm otherwise helpless in, that's exactly what she did, and it was kind of a great moment. So we're coming on Thanksgiving, and I want us to think about Thanksgiving kind of through that lens. I'm deeply grateful for all we have. It's a frustrating year, I understand, but I'm deeply grateful for all we have, even in light of all the sort of frustration and illness and tragedy that we face. Precisely because I know Christ is King, and within that kingship, we do have this deep hope. That everything's going to be okay. He's going to come again in all of his glory and reestablish his kingdom of justice and healing and peace. We know that. And there's a lot to be thankful simply within that hope. I don't know how we can endure this without that hope, but we have it. And that brings us to Thanksgiving. So let's pray, and we'll do our communion time. Holy Father, thank you so much. We're just grateful, and we know the hope that you bring. We know that the security and peace that gives us, and we want to revel in that. We want to be part of your kingdom. So give us the strength and insight that will teach us to do that. Amen.